Welcome back from that. It's interesting to know that you're right there as we discuss powering the future, how Nigeria can lead Africa's energy transition. And we'll be exploring very important concepts right there, the balance between energy access and sustainability. We'll also get to Nigeria's energy mix, the shift from fossil fuel to renewable. We'll also talk about opportunities for job, innovation, investment in green energy, the role of government policies, private sector and community, among several other things. And you know, if we have to talk about energy, climate change, environment, one person who is a one-stop shop for all this conversation, who is an expert in it, is Ifeanyi Mba. Did I pronounce it well?
Yes, you did.
Ifeanyi.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me here.
Ifeanyi is the Managing Director, Climate Infrastructure and Consulting Limited. Thank you so much for being part of the
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So we'll keep talking about energy transition. And in fact, Nigeria seems to have a law, an act that's supposed to guide us into this energy transition. But I guess my first question would be, where are we generally when it comes to awareness of let's go cleaner?
Yes. So, as most people are aware, over the last 10 years, we have had an increase in awareness from the masses, as well as the energy providers, right? And the government now understands that it is in their best interest for more and more people to get independent, sustainable access to electricity. Because the less the load on the grid is, the better, AEDC, IEDC, all of the DISCOs, the distribution companies, the better they are at providing high voltage power to the rest of the city, especially high voltage demand facilities, right? So think about it. If you have domestic homes, estates where everybody has solar panels on their roofs, they have inverters in their homes, and they have either partially or completely isolated themselves from the national grid, right? It means there is now more electricity to go around. So it puts the demand of for electricity lowered on the discos, right? And that has been what is helping power supply improve. A lot of people must have noticed that, you are getting more light than usual. That's generally a good thing. This is not the only contributing factor, but that's part of it. So back to the main crux of the question, which is where are we? Where are we is we are making progress, however slowly, right? The next conversation we should be having is how do we improve the pace of adoption? Because generally speaking, a lot of people struggle with new technology adoption.
That's true.
I mean, even in the early 2000s, it took a while for people to switch on to using mobile phones, right? And then as people got on, mobile phones became cheaper and cheaper until now everybody has a phone, right? From the fancy iPhones to the local phones, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the direction we should be looking at when it comes to renewable energy and sustainable energy in general, which is ensuring that two things: you have the adequate sensitization for the masses from the government as well as the private sector, and that is part of what we try to do at Climate Infrastructure and Consulting, right? Where we push the right kind of PR out there so that the people are made aware of these opportunities, and then over time, with increase in demand and improvements in the human capital involved in that technology, it will become cheaper and more accessible to everybody. And just as with phones, when 30 years ago only the wealthy had phones, now you still have solar being the preserve for the elite and the upper middle class, right? The goal is to make it so accessible that everybody can have one. A market woman with her shop in Jabi or Wuse can have panels on her roof, and she's using it to power her refrigerator where she stores her cold room food stuff or food things that she sells in general. That's the idea.
Oh, that's a very good idea. However, how can we balance this energy access and sustainability? Contrary to what the minister had said, over 90 million Nigerians lack sufficient energy supply. So how can the country scale up? What are the infrastructures on ground to ensure that there's sustainable goals, particularly in rural communities?
So I would say that there are two ways to go about it. There is the human capital development, especially for rural communities, right, where they don't have engineers just running around um, randomly in the community. You would need to provide the kind of structure where you teach members of that community to support the technical needs of that community, right? So a lot of maintenance work goes with solar. Sometimes it's something as simple as cleaning the panels, which a rag with water does, but sometimes it's much more technical, where you need to actually understand the technology. You need to be able to do a replacement for some of the wet batteries, while do rewiring for some of the drier setups, right? So human capital development is definitely something we should be exploring, especially for the rural communities. They feel empowered, they feel competent, and that would overall boost the energy experience of those in the rural areas. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, there has been a lot of conversation around manufacturing of solar panels, right? I know in Nasarawa State, which is not too far from Kefi, there's a new place being set up. However, given the kind of demand that Nigeria has for power, it is not enough to rely on the local manufacturers. We would need to continue importing from Asia, be it China, be it India, be it Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Malaysia. And that is because if we prematurely limit importation of these very, very vital equipment, we slowly ground down the sector. Because right now it's still burgeoning, right? Yes, we have a lot of we go around on the streets and then we see panels on the roofs of people's homes and we think it's everywhere. We are not yet there. We still have years to go. We still have months of infrastructural technological development. We still have years of human capital awareness to reach that peak where we can now say, okay, maybe we are doing too much. We are far from.
Is there such a thing as doing too much?
Well, at some point you could have saturation.
Oh, really?
Yes, you could have saturation where the demand on the grid, and this sometimes has happened in some parts of Europe where because it's so sustainable, the national grid has excess power.
Oh.
Yes. So it's like saying, because everybody has food, right? The food that you cooked, there's nobody to eat it.
Right.
That's the way to think about it. Yeah. So, but it took several decades of Germany prioritizing sustainable energy to get to that point. And they already had a technological readiness that is way ahead of what we have right now. So when I say we are not there yet, we are far from it. And we have a different population profile. We have a different population density profile. And these also play an impact on energy demands, right? So we are far from it. So we still need as much support as we can get.
Okay, so let's talk about this energy mix. We keep talking about fossil and fossil fuel transition. And I'm happy you mentioned that we're not there yet. However, there's this need to decarbonize. And while you mentioned Germany, I was a bit excited that can we get to that point where
yes, we can.
Where our national grid, whether it collapses or not, nobody will feel it at all.
Yes.
So what actionable strategies can you suggest that would ensure renewables like solar and hydropower would be accessible,
yes.
Mitigating economic risk, of course.
Right away, I would say yes, it is possible. We can get to where Germany is, but we cannot get to where Germany is by hoping. We can get to where they are, and maybe even transcend where they have gotten to by planning. It takes a lot of intentional planning, a lot of strategic thinking, and a lot of managerial leadership. And a lot of this is lacking both on the private sector and on the public side of things, right? So again, if you speak to those who have been in the space for a long time, they will tell you energy generation has to be decentralized, and we need to explore dynamic systems for this. So in some parts of the country, you could use wind in combination with solar. Other parts you use hydro. In some parts, geothermal is a very good way to go, and it is still deemed renewable because what you're doing is you're using the heat from the ground, from the earth, to power steam engines. So outside of hydro, most energy generation is steam. if it's nuclear, you're using nuclear heat to heat up water until it's steam, and that pressure is what you use to turn a steam turbine. Same thing with some of the gas powered plants that we have, right? So it's saying rather than use petroleum, rather than use gas, just use the earth's heat, and then you can channel that into generating steam and electricity. So if we explore multiple dynamic systems for power generation, that's where you do not have different geopolitical regions relying on the same sources of produced or generated energy. Every now and then we hear the grid is down, the grid is down. What happened? Oh, a dam in either Kanji or Bida failed. So everybody's waiting until they fix it and then we get that power. That is part of the issue. If we did not have so many parts of the country relying on just 2 or 3 sources of generated power, we wouldn't have first of all, there wouldn't be that much demand on those facilities to then break down. That's one. And then 2, even when you do have grid collapses, it will be isolated better in smaller regions than having a nationwide. Yes. So these are the kind of strategic thinking that's required. And a lot of the time, some of the concern has to do with how do we fund this kind of project? Because energy generation projects are intense financial investments. Anybody who knows, it runs into the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, right? So the question is, there is a lot of economic development, but how do you justify these kinds of investments? And the way to go about it is PPP, public-private partnerships. Let's pick a Zamfara state, for example, right? Or a Plateau state, for example, and say, okay, you have this demand for power, but you do not yet have the financial muscle to make it happen. How about we partner with 2 companies where on one hand, one is generating power and they are supplying to another manufacturing plant, say a cement manufacturing plant, and that cement manufacturing plant is a major sponsor of the project. So it's a win-win thing where the state benefits from getting power supply, right? The power generation outfits, that private sector, is making money from the heavy duty industries that will be set up in that state, in that region. So it does take a lot of strategic thinking. It does take a lot of going across the table or the hallway to shake hands with different parties and say, how about we reach an agreement that's beneficial, especially in the medium to long term, for each and every one of us. That's the way to go about it.
Honestly,
that's one of
many ways to go about it.
Yes,
that's really interesting. But my mind just went to gas. Nigeria holds Africa's largest gas reserves. So how can we leverage on gas and how can we safeguard that to as one of the
viable means? Yes. So there is a conversation to be had about gas for sure. Everybody who is aware of the situation of things knows that we can't, at the drop of the hat, go green. It has to be transitional. And gas, being generally cleaner than oil, is a way to go about it, right? So there are a lot of technological advancements to actually improve the greenhouse impact of gas turbines. And I would say that we should, and this might sound a bit controversial, but in the absence of steady electricity, using gas in a way that is cleaner, right, and supplying electricity based on that gas, which would then reduce the demand on diesel generators, which are contributing a lot of air pollution. Any of the oil-based facilities, right, if you could reduce the demand on those by revving up gas to be the next big thing. Gas can then be the stepping stone to a greener future. And I will say this, over the next 3 decades, and I know to a lot of people 3 decades is a very long time,
but that's like 30 years.
That's like 30 years, right? But if you think about it, 1995 was not that long ago. 1995 was not that long ago, and if they had the kind of foresight to to think and plan, because remember, like I said, we can
So-
get to where Germany is
By
by
planning.
planning, not by hoping, right? So we can begin to think that way. 25 to 30 years from now, hydrogen is going to be the next sort of multi-purpose fuel, right? Cars, airplanes, everything. You might have different mediums of carriage, meaning different medium in which the hydrogen is stored. If it's just pressurized tanks, if it's non-solvent, non-reactive solvents, right? You
Okay.
can have those.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means. I can get into the details of that later, right? But ultimately, hydrogen is going to be the way. And you need a vibrant technological infrastructure on gas technology to be able to effectively use hydrogen. And that is where an advantage in gas powered generation comes. So I am, as much as I am very much pro green technology and green energy, and I see gas as a compromise stepping stone in that direction, because it will help
Like a bridge fuel.
as a
sort of.
bridge for
Okay.
as a bridge into the hydrogen world.
Right.
Yes, that's
Okay.
how I see it.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's talk job creation and innovation. I should expect that governments around the world will jump at this, especially in Africa, will jump at this. But are there opportunities in this transition for job creation? Youth unemployment is hitting the roof.
It is
over
hitting the roof,
40%
yes.
as we speak.
Yes, that's. I think about that, and I think of all the opportunities wasted, right?
Wasted?
Wasted to get the youth up and running when it
right.
comes to.
So there are opportunities in the green energy.
In the green energy,
Right.
is just making them accessible, right, to people. So a lot of the opportunities are not structured, and that is because unfortunately the industry, the sub-industry of green energy and renewable energy is still not very regulated. There's a lot of, would I say, inconsistent knowledge going on. So what we need is to have structure to the regulation, and that way young people would be able to know what they can do. Because right now, let's say you're an electrical engineering student in a university in Nigeria, University of Lagos, University of Abuja, Ilorin, anywhere, and you are in your 300 level, 400 level, 500 level, you are thinking of going into solar and working as an engineer. You probably wouldn't know where to begin, because there are no structured strata on different aspects of the work. So there needs to be some structure.
Who would ensure that happens? Because I should expect from the private sector there are business opportunities.
Yes.
So is it in their place now to ensure structure, or is government and government policies and regulations that would ensure structure?
So let me use an analogy. A lot of people in the accounting space, they know what ICANN certification
Does for them,
right? They know what an ACCA certification does for them. They know what's required. They know that, okay, if I go in this direction, and ICANN will prepare me to be able to do this, an ACCA, things like that. We need structures like that to help people be able to visualize what kind of work is entailed in renewable energy. So right now, what you just have are a few really competent engineers who have the technical knowledge but also have the experience, struggling with guiding a number of unpracticed, unknowledgeable engineers who are just going with the flow. So we need the support from the government to reinforce and strengthen a lot of these engineering associations. Because we already have current, we have all of these, institutional fellowships or agencies. But what we want is one that's dedicated to renewable energy, that has the kind of information that we need, and has the kind of, be it certification, be it training, whatever it is that will give and grant engineers and technicians and all affiliated persons in the space the right knowledge and the right understanding of the industry in Nigeria. Because in North America, in the United States, and in Europe, renewable energy has taken a different path in terms of institutional infrastructure. That is what is still lacking here, and that is the kind of support that will give the industry the kind of boost that will give, that we will all see it flying and progressing at a pace nobody even foresaw. So it's not logistically or financially demanding or expensive to get this set up. It just takes the initiative to make that happen.
Now, is it trustworthy? Is it dependable? Is it sustainable? Can cities completely depend on renewable energy to run a component of itself?
Yes. The short answer is yes, but there's a long answer.
Okay.
Right. If you're thinking just solar panels, then no. And I say that because solar panels have its own power supply profile. You cannot use solar panels to power a heavy-duty manufacturing plant. You can use solar panels, your typical PV photovoltaic solar panels, to power a cement manufacturing plant, right? So solar panels are designed to cater to residential and some service industry related commercial needs. What you need to do for renewable energy to power an entire city is to have a dynamic mix of renewable energy sources. Yes. So on the one hand, you have PV panels. On the other hand, you could have solar thermal, which is basically using the heat from the sun to generate energy, right? You could also then do geothermal. You could also then do hydrogen gas, right? So it's still tied to, again, remember the bridge conversation we had about hydrogen and gas, right? You could still do things with hydrogen gas. That way, let's say you have a large city where on the one hand you have an industrial complex where you have high powered need for energy, while on the other hand you have a residential estate and you have hospitals and all that. You can have PV panels running the estates, you can have hybrid systems running the hospitals and universities, and then you have the hydrogen gas and the geothermal and the others for powering the heavy duty manufacturing, power intense.
You know, I asked
sectors.
Because recently, I don't know if you followed that news, that's about 3 weeks ago, there was a complete power outage in France, some part of Portugal, and
I followed it,
yes.
Spain as well.
Spain, France, Portugal. I was
you were shocked.
I was shocked. I was shocked, and also we could afford to have energy complete national grid collapse in Nigeria. A lot of we already have generators, but when there was a blackout, insufficiency here, but when there was a blackout there, indeed it was blackout, and it's scary because a lot of components of the city depend solely on energy. So that's why I asked the sustainability and reliance on this, but well, you have given a good explanation as to the necessary mix that will not bring about that complete blackout. Have other sources.
Not to be in defense of the European blackout that affected Southwest Europe, but that's a once in a decade, once in a generation kind of thing, right? Every engineer understands that there will be moments like that. You plan for it. Be it a once in a 100-year event, or once in a 30-year event, or once in a 10-year event. Anything less long-term than that, then you have terrible engineering design methodologies, right? So imagine, for example, that let's say over the next 10 years, we make tremendous progress with sustainable power generation. And then on a random weekend, we get power shut down from maybe a hydro plant or a geothermal plant. We wouldn't just say that, sustainable energy does not work, because we had it run for several years and then we just had the week or two where it didn't work.
I understand.
You know what I'm saying? Yes. So what I can say though is there is definitely space to ensure that you have sufficient backup.
Okay.
Right. So the essential facilities in a city, your hospitals, your police stations, your maybe even schools, government buildings, those agencies that we know have to keep running for the society to stay sane and normal. It's okay if the fish your freezer knows
Gets
that
bad.
if you know that if you are sick, there's going to be power to take care
Absolutely,
of you, right?
absolutely.
Of course, and again, the idea is such a thing will happen once every 30 years and not every other weekend, which is what we have here. So nobody is saying sustainability, sustainable energy is foolproof and it's perfect and it's going to last forever. Once you do it, you just cross your legs
and
and,
like,
you go to
oh,
and then your grandchildren will come and they'll still no. There's still a lot of maintenance work that goes into it, right? What is happening now is people who are not directly involved in engineering are beginning to see how much work goes into building things, making them run and maintaining them, right? Your Kainji Dam, your Jeba Dam, the gas plants in the South, all of these facilities require heavy maintenance, heavy engineering oversight and operation, right? But the average person does not know this. They just know, say, they don't bring light to
exactly.
NEPA don't bring light, NEPA don't carry light, right? But now that you have a generator, now that you have a solar power system set up in your home, and then your engineer is telling you, oh, you need to service it every 2 years, you're now thinking, okay, so this is, I have to pay attention to this, and we are slowly but surely cultivating a culture of engineering thinking, which is why I do believe that we are actually moving in some sense in the right direction by developing a culture of self-sufficiency and being directly aware of these processes so that we can continue to move in a decentralized mode of power generation. That way, even grid collapses like what happened in Europe would not even affect us in 10, 15, 20 years from now if we move in the right direction, right?
What a life. I'm just thinking, I'm just imagining a life where we will not have
if we plan and do the right things, that is a possibility. And that way, if you do eventually have grid collapses, it will be isolated to 1 or 2 or at most 3 states in the country, and it will just affect the entire country and maybe like half of West Africa.
Okay, the last time you were here, we talked about community resilience, and your organization, that's the Climate Infrastructure and Consulting, does intermittent trainings as well for those in the local underserved communities, just so that they could have the capacity building necessary to sustain some of the initiatives. But I would like you to still shed more light on how communities can be more resilient and enjoy from this energy transition we keep talking about.
Absolutely. So there are many ways to go about it, but one way that Climate Infrastructure and Consulting has been able to support people is to collaborate with communities and say, these funds are not readily available, but if there is that collective effort, you can set up a mini solar farm. Not everyone would have 247 electricity with your refrigerators and fridge powered, but we can isolate the system in a way that you would always have light in your home. You would always have electricity to charge your phones, charge your devices.
For some, that's just enough.
For some, that is just enough, right? And that is what we understand. We understand that not everybody lives a lifestyle of somebody in the upper middle class in Abuja, where if 3 ACs are not doing,
as you get into this room,
you get what I mean. Like, some people just need the basic light and all that, and we're saying we can get that for you. We would even work with members from your community to cut down the cost on like labor and all that. That way it is cheaper for you and they feel personally invested in the project. Because what I have found is that the more people are personally invested in a project, in an idea, in a solution, the more
they protect and
ensure that it enjoys a longevous, life.
That's true.
That's true. That's the goal.
Thank you so much for being part of the program. We, of course, as usual, you're going to return once again to talk about another component of this. It's inexhaustible.
Yes.
Thank you for being part of the program.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Joy.
So we've been discussing so much all around energy transition and how Nigeria can champion that. But we're going for a short break. We have yet another interview in stock for you, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.